The two readings this morning, I'm doing the first and then Jeanette the second. The first one is from 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 to 27. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. And then there is, carrying on, there's a section, the need for self-discipline. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize.
Galatians chapter 2, 11 to 14. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas, in front of them all, "You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish custom?"
So I've called this All Things to All People. I don't know if you want 3 words all begin with the same letter. Alliteration. Well, I'll give you 3: purpose, possibility, and practice. And that's the only time you're going to get them. Okay, once again, purpose, possibility, and practice. It's always the case when you're given a passage to speak on that you've read time and time again over the years, you realise you've never really read it properly, never really thought about what it means, and that's the case with this. So here Paul is writing to the Corinthian church, and this passage follows on from the text that Justin's already spoken about. And this particular passage comes at the climax of Paul's defense of himself as an apostle. Having told the Corinthians off for some of their practices and given some advice, he seems to be answering a question that may have been in their minds, which is, who gives you the right to talk to us like this? He writes earlier in the chapter, "Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you, for you're the seal of my apostleship in the Lord." And one of the signs of his integrity and his authenticity that he doesn't want anything from them other than their commitment to the gospel and the way of Christ. In verse 18 he writes, "What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel I may offer it free of charge, and so not make full use of my rights as a preacher of the gospel." So Paul writes to the Corinthians as an evangelist who's eager to win others for Christ. He feels compelled to preach the gospel. So his intention is to win others for Christ, not as sort of notches on his belt or numbers on his tally sheet, but that others would know the freedom and grace that he's known in the gospel of Christ, that they would know the grace of God in their lives. He writes, "For when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, since I'm compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." And then in this he writes, he's doing this to win as many as possible. "I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in his blessings." So this whole passage that we've just read has got, the first one that is, must be seen in the context of Paul's desire to see others come to know Christ and to know his grace, his blessings in their life, his forgiveness. And if we don't have the same motive, this passage doesn't really have much to say to us, because that's why he's saying he's doing it. Now, to win others can have a wider meaning. It can mean to win groups of people previously excluded. It can mean to win people who've drifted away from Christ and from his way. It may even, perhaps, include winning back friends from whom we've become estranged. So that's the context of this passage. Now, before we get on to what it means to be all things to people, I have a confession to make. And that is, I've spent much of my life trying not to be all things to all people. In the past, when I was teaching, I made it clear that I didn't read the same newspapers, watch the same television programs, speak in the same way as the children I was teaching. In a way, I was saying, I'm not like you. No, I didn't actually say that in those words, but that's what I was doing. And it wasn't because my way of doing things was better than theirs, although in my mind it probably was. It was because it was different. It wasn't a moral judgment. So when I say I've got a confession to make, I mean genuinely, I have a confession to make. I shouldn't have done it, but that's what I did. And it didn't occur to me that in doing this, I was effectively rejecting their culture. As I said, it wasn't to do with morality, it was just to do with you like that and I like this. So when we reject the culture of the people around us and effectively cut ourselves off, we are effectively saying, you have to be like us. Come and be like us. Your culture is inferior. So, as a church, are we saying that people have to be like us to know the grace of God? Or are we saying they can know the grace of God where they are and as who they are? A few of us went to the Baptist Assembly in May in Telford. And one of the Bible study sessions was led by a deaf woman, and she led it entirely in sign language. Those of us who didn't know sign language were excluded. Admittedly, there was a translation given. And sitting next to me was the area minister for part of London. I said to her, how many churches in your area have someone doing sign language at the front? She said, none. I said, how many deaf people do you know in your churches? None. I thought that was interesting, the whole of London. It had never occurred to me before that deaf people are unintentionally excluded from churches because they can't hear what's going on and none of us provide signing for them. And then I was thinking, who else is excluded from our churches because of the way we do things? Because in a way we're saying, come and be like us. Come and sit with us on a Sunday morning and listen to somebody speaking. So we can exclude people quite unintentionally when our practices, our culture, our way of doing things is not accessible to them or denies their identity. And this is why we need to be all things to all people. So what does Paul mean when he says, I make myself all things to all people? Is he suggesting that we pretend we're something we're not? I remember, or that we should compromise our morals to fit in with other people. I remember when I was young, there was a young man who came from a Bible college, and he said that he so much wanted to see people come to Christ, he was quite prepared to lie if it got them to believe in Christ. And he was clearly told, no, that's not right. His motive was good, but the methods would have been really bad. And as we read in the second reading there, Paul opposed Peter, Cephas as it says, for acting like a Jew with the Jews and then like a Gentile with the Gentiles. So is Paul not contradicting himself here? Peter had been eating with Gentiles, contrary to Jewish law, but when some more Orthodox Jews arrived, he stopped eating with Gentiles. And Paul called that hypocrisy. Wasn't Peter trying to be all things to all people? Well, no, Paul would say he wasn't. He was pretending, and he was denying what God had shown him. Just imagine if we said we are an inclusive church, we include people, whatever their race, their nationality, their gender identity, and then if we knew some more sort of Orthodox people were coming to our church, we said to all the gay people we knew, please don't come next week, or at least keep it a secret. It would be utter hypocrisy, and it would deny what God has shown us. So that is not being all things to all people. And Peter wasn't being, although he probably thought he was. We're not called to be something we're not. So is Paul's suggestion we should be like undercover police who infiltrate ourselves into another culture so we can win them for Christ? Well, no. Paul would say that's also pretending that you're something you're not. It would also lead you to do things that you know are morally wrong, because often people who are undercover have to do that. So should I pretend that I'm a woman, that I'm deaf, I'm blind, I'm gay, I'm African Asian, or even that I'm Scottish in order to be all things to all people? Well, no, I can't. I can't be any of these things. I can't even be Scottish, sadly. I can't be what I'm not. This is one reason why diversity in the church is so important, because we have people who can be what they are to other people that some of us are not. But Paul is actually writing here that he personally has become all things to all people. So allowing for some kind of hyperbole, some kind of exaggeration, he clearly means more than people ministering to people who are like them. So, putting it into practice, what does it mean for us? Where is our model for being all things to all people? Well, it wouldn't surprise you to know that the model is Jesus. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance of a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Jesus didn't pretend that he was human, he was human. We are told in Hebrews that he was tempted in every way as we are, and yet without sin. Jesus was baptized, identifying himself with sinners who needed to repent. He ate with tax collectors and sinners. He touched people with leprosy to heal them. He asked for a drink from a Samaritan woman and spent 2 days in her village. Was he pretending? No, he wasn't. He was willing to associate and identify with people who were not like him, but not pretend to be them. And then there's Paul. He spoke the language and culture of people he was with. When speaking to a Jewish audience, he spoke like a Jew. He quoted the Jewish scriptures. An example would be, if you want to look it up, in Acts 13 in Pisidian Antioch, where he was talking to Jews. But when speaking to a Greek audience in Athens, he didn't quote the Bible or his Bible. He quoted their own writings. He didn't condemn their religious practices and smash up their idols. He actually said, as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar to this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. So he said, actually, you already know God, you're already sort of worshipping him, but this is what you call the unknown God, is the God who made the heavens and the earth. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, is actually not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. He wasn't pretending to be Greek, but he was speaking to the Greeks in their own language and through their own culture. He also worked for a living as a skilled craftsman. He didn't set himself up as a fancy evangelist. He wrote to the Corinthians, I've labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst and spent time in prison. So he could relate to the poor and oppressed as well as to the educated and elite. And so for Jesus and Paul, being all things to all people meant associating and identifying with ordinary people, including those excluded by others, and understanding and communicating through their culture. I think when we come down on a Friday to the drop-in. In a sense, that's what in our small way we are trying to do. Trying to communicate people and to bring grace into their own culture. We're not saying, come and be like us. Who's heard of J. Hudson Taylor? Well, yeah, a few have. Hudson Taylor he founded the China Inland Mission in 1865. So he became a missionary to China. He adopted Chinese dress, in contrast to most foreign missionaries at the time and afterwards. So he didn't make the Chinese dress like him. He dressed like them. He ate Chinese food with Chinese implements. He lived among the Chinese in Chinese housing. He and the China Inland Mission set high standards for acquiring the local languages of those they intended to reach. He observed local customs and local etiquette, local politeness. He studied traditional Chinese culture, including elements of Chinese science, and he refused protection from the British consular authorities and military power. And for all this, he was heavily criticised by many Christians, saying, "You're becoming like them." But he was willing, as far as possible, to be like the Chinese he was living with, communicating Christ through and not in opposition to their culture. Remember, on the day of Pentecost, everyone heard the apostles speaking in their own language. Well, a lad many years ago called Dave Howells, if I got the right name, it was Dave Howells, wasn't it? And I remember him saying, he served as a volunteer, I remember him saying that when people become Christians, unlike on the day of Pentecost, they start speaking a language no one else understands. And this is active, not passive. The second part of today's passage shows Paul's commitment to being all things to all people was active and not passive. It involved self-discipline, it involved effort, it involved being what the current or the recent buzzword, intentional, for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. So, to conclude, by inclusion, do we mean come and be like us? Or do we take Christ into the world of others? Is it two-way? Do we allow ourselves to be included by others rather than just them included by us? Are we willing to be all things to all people, to take the grace of God into other people's worlds? Norman Hillier summarized Paul's all things didn't mean compromise on Christian principles, but that he will sacrifice his own legitimate interests and preferences completely if he thereby may save some. So am I willing to set aside our prejudices and self-interest, to go outside our comfort zones, to make ourselves vulnerable and even open to misunderstanding by other Christians in order to win others to Christ, to share the grace of God that we know in their lives? Just one quote to finish from Atticus Finch. Which book is that? To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus Finch, the lawyer. Atticus Finch, in the deep south of America, defends a black man accused of raping this girl, when in fact it was her own father who'd raped her. And he says to his daughter, called Scout, first of all, if you learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. I thought it was a nice quote to finish with. Identifying, associating with, understanding, making ourselves vulnerable to bring the grace of God into other people's lives. Amen.